Hello friends, Jennifer Pearson here, Thistle Gypsy, and within the last, few days, I've been playing with some of my newer decks, and when you get a deck and you realize it has really interesting images, but they're atypical to any system, and I want to get to know each individual card, etc., and just spend time with each card. And I've done that to some extent with the decks, but instead of referring to books, I've the guidebooks, which I've done to some extent, those that have guidebooks, some of them, Los Scarabeo decks, I don't consider their guidebooks to be much in the way of guidebooks. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times they're not. They don't seem to connect with the cards very well. And so one thing I do is I take them to bed at night, and sometimes in the morning, and I just look through them. I don't do anything remotely profound. I don't look at them with any sort of intention to understand the card, at least initially. I might stop on a card and just go, well, that's just really weird, I don't get it. And maybe sometimes that's kind of a release and you start to kind of get it, or maybe the third time you go through the deck, and again, it's just for the pleasure or the interest or the intrigue of the images. I'll go through, and maybe the third time I see a card, I'll say, I think that the most significant detail is X. And sometimes once I can kind of hit on that, some other things will just sort of fall into place, and I will kind of get my own understanding of what the card will mean to me. So I've done that a little bit, but I'm not requiring myself to have an understanding of every card or something like that. What I'm doing in the last few days is I'm asking myself, as I'm messing with the deck, is what kind of questions can this deck answer? What do I think, at least for me, or what kinds of reading will work for this? And I don't often get a really good answer. What you have in front of you here on camera is the Greenwood Tarot, and I did come up with questions for this. What was it like? I'm looking at it was what do I need, or who am I as who am I as a reader, who am I as a sister, who am I as a partner or a teacher, something like that, that they're kind of identity cards. And for this particular deck, well, I won't go too much further with that. I'll come back to this deck because that's why it's here. And then another thing I did, and I started this with it was the Tarot of the Cat People. And again, one evening I thought, I'm taking the Tarot of the Cat People to bed with me. and I just flipped through them, enjoying the images. And it was truly that. I wasn't trying to understand anything. I was just enjoying the images. And it occurred to me, actually, I think it was afterwards, I think I was sitting here, and I think I was putting them back away after having looked at them. And the deck was sitting over here, and I just thought, I'm going to just lay them out. I'm just going to see how they interact together. I just want to see how they interact together. And it was a really interesting experience. It's something I hadn't thought of to do as an initial exploration of a deck, is to lay them out and kind of let them speak a little bit about, well, I don't know that it's speaking. Reveal, I suppose. Reveal how the cards themselves interact. It's like with the Tarot of the Cat people, I knew that they all had people on them. They're, it's kind of aptly named. They're not a facey deck in the sense of, they're not close-ups. You can usually see somebody's, I think maybe even always, see the person's entire body. But they're kind of portraits. Like every card is a portrait, as opposed to showing interactions between, well, no, they do have couples. And that should have been a clue to me. Because when I laid them out, I ended up with 10 cards. What I found was that they worked best laying out 4 cards, 2 rows of 4 cards, and then a card at each end. And that they work like for relationship readings. I would never, just looking at that, have thought about that deck as a relationship deck particularly, although it has some beautiful cards that do depict relationships. But when I laid them out like that, I said, oh, this is a relationship deck. It has such a shamanic feel to it, and it could very well be. I don't think it needs to be pigeonholed. I can probably use it for a variety of things. But when I laid it out and saw how the cards interacted, it just really clicked. And so once it happened with the Tarot of the Cat people, I started to get curious about other decks that I initially felt like, I can hardly kind of wrap my mind around the individual cards, let alone, a set of cards. But then I started to do that, like this evening, I was playing with this deck. And so the Greenwood, and so the idea that that a new deck, that I don't understand each card, or I don't get kind of accurate or immediate impressions from each card, that I could put it, that actually having more than one card out would actually help me understand the deck better. To me, that's kind of counterintuitive, but I'm going with it. So I was playing with this deck, and one of the issues, and I started to discover this issue when I was messing with it. Again, just going through the cards, and I did, it's funny because I was reading the guidebook, and this is the artist's guidebook, not the one that is copied in the Wildwood Tarot. So I was reading through that, but I wasn't really connecting it very well. She does a better job, I think, than the Wildwood Tarot book. Of helping me understand what the cards are getting at, what the images are getting at, or trying to evoke or represent. But it wasn't quite working for me. But I do like the deck. It's just, and just same thing with the Tarot of the Cat people and the Fairy Lights Tarot, which is the other one that I've experimented with in this way. But what I discovered, I started getting, an inkling about, and then discovered today as I was laying them out that my stopping point is the court cards are a big stopping point for me. I love the images. Most of the images. I love that image, especially. But they aren't working for me somehow, particularly as court cards. This maybe I could. So what I did, though there's one, I've only got 15 here, so one is lying in wait in the deck, is I've taken them out. I don't know if I'll put some of them back, like, that is such a cool bear. Such a cool bear image. And I like the rabbit image also. But they're not working for me in terms of kind of getting them. I just like them. I just like them as images. They're not working very well for me as tarot cards. So, I was laying cards out, so I was playing with this, and I tried 3, and then I tried 2, and then similar kind of to Tarot of the Cat people, so this may be true of me in general. Is that 4 cards, laying 2 rows of 4, works the best. 3 works pretty good as well, but 4 seem to work the best. With the fairy lights, I found that a 9-card spread. I can do a 9-card spread with the fairy lights, and I feel like like a story starts to unfold, or that it's starting to speak to me. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm trying something even a little bit different. And that is, I'm going to do a deck interview. And I haven't done this deck interview with the Greenwood before, but I thought I would give this a try. So what I'm going to do is, instead of pulling 1 card for each question, I'm going to pull 3 and maybe 4. And see if if they string together as a story or a sentence that will be an answer to the question, as opposed to pulling just 1. Alright, so number 1, what are you here to teach people? So let's pull 3. And I eventually might end up taking off the tarot associations, partly because I know what these 2 are anyway, just looking at them, because they're so close to the Rider-Waite. This 8 of Wands is focusing, it's kind of the opposite of the 8 of Wands, in that it's all focused in toward a center. And that's what all of these cards essentially are about. So he's gathering, or has a hold of, all of these things, so he's concentrating them. The Hermit is focused on a lamp. The 8 of Wands also, they're all concentrated on creating this central fire. And there's even a central fire here that you can't quite see. It's behind the door. And there's a fire here, over here. But this is, to me, really what it's about. This is kind of a clinging. So maybe even kind of for people to stop clinging to... Here he's clinging to the material and not the potential. So to stop clinging to the material aspect of the notion of fire, and focusing on the spiritual aspect of fire. And also, even though the Hermit is alone, or is walking alone, he or she is encountering another. There's the tree for one thing, and the wren. So it's kind of a false isolation. or a traveling way of visiting. And so this I see as communal. You know, eight wands coming together to create a greater fire. So to me, it's kind of spiritual community. So leaving behind the notion of the material aspect of fire and focusing on the spiritual and communal aspects of fire. Or energy, perhaps. Fire representing energy. And in many ways, happiness. Because it does represent warmth as well. Okay, so there's question number 1. Question number 2. How would you describe yourself? Well, and there's the sun again, so there's the warmth again, and there's the idea of community again. And also with these birds, with cranes, ritual. Community ritual. Jumping off, which is exactly what I'm doing. I'm just jumping off. Trying something different with them. It's kind of peacock out of the heads, and butterfly, or moth maybe. It looks more like a Luna moth pattern on the wings. And even here, this fool has put the material aside. The bag is sitting down. The bag is not, it's not weighing her down. She's set it aside. And then this is again, you know, it's the sun card. It's a card of happiness and warmth. And protected happiness and warmth. So it's really, it's describing itself as bright and cheery and happy, which is really interesting because my initial response to it was that it was almost overwhelmingly serious and kind of going really deep into a lot of symbolism, or kind of primal is the word I would use, kind of primal energy, kind of digging down into some really primal energy that I didn't feel like I had instant access to. And this sun card too is a lot about community with, or communing even with the planet, because there's all these varieties of plants, which I'm sure are sacred plants, in one way or another, all around the edge. So it's almost more like the World card. So if I'm thinking about this deck as a deck of community, it might be, because that primal aspect is still there, that ancient feel to it, that ancient aspect is still there. The community that's coming out, like here, might be a community across time. Community between the modern, which is me, right here, and ancestors or ancient energies. So curious also. All right, so 3. What is your opinion of me? So some really curious energy here too. I feel it's fairly accurate. I'm a Cancer, so it's giving me the Moon card. I think that's supposed to be an egg. To me it looks more like a stone. I feel like it's telling me, because I've got these 3 cards, this clearly is a threshold kind of card, even an awakening kind of card with all of the stuff going on in the head. It's like, you know, an electrical current. If you've got, you know, your hand on one node of a battery and your hand on another, the current's going to go through you. And so that's kind of the feeling of this to me, both being on a threshold and being charged with energy, which is interesting. You know, I've got these fatigue issues, and a lot of times during my videos I'm yawning, but being charged with energy. And this also feels like a threshold to me, or a card that's expressing threshold, because if this is representing me, or the deck's opinion of me, and I've got this card with it, I think this deck is saying I'm here. Maybe I am an egg. Maybe I haven't come out fully of my shell yet, in terms of this deck, maybe. But I also see it as a middle, like I've waded this far into the marsh, and I'm stopping here, and I'm observing what all's going on over here, what all's going on over here. The bowl makes me a little nervous, you know, so all of that kind of energy. And then this is interesting, 3rd card, so kind of an observer teacher, because this is clearly a card of teaching, and it's a beautiful card of teaching. And I don't think that I am the child here. I think that I am depicted here. And of course it is accurate. If we just wanted to do mundane things, we could say, you know, that its opinion of me is that I'm a teacher, which technically I am. I'm a Cancer, moon child. And not too much of a wanderer now, but I certainly have been. But I think what its opinion of me is that I'm maybe waiting to learn. I'm on the threshold of learning, and I am an observer. So, you know, maybe somebody who likes to stop here and observe what's going on before diving in completely, before doing my fool bit, before jumping in. So again, curious cards. And they do, you know, if I had just pulled the moon card, I don't know kind of what I would have gotten. I probably wouldn't have gotten very much from that. But I'm able to think about these cards better in groups. And 3 is working for this particular thing, so I'm just going to keep it at 3. So, number 4, how can I best collaborate with you? And here we have more thresholds. My goodness, this is a different sort of... This one's not coming to me quite as easily as some of the others, because it seems like very different. How can I best collaborate with you? Kind of keeping it close, certainly, with this home. So this to me would mean maybe doing, and these 2 together can mean that too, because this is outward. So you've got inward and outward. So these 2 could mean like only doing online readings, not doing readings where I'm at home, and as opposed to doing in-person readings with these cards, because that gives me a little more time to kind of absorb the energies of the cards, if I don't have somebody sitting there waiting for my intuition. but to me, this is also, how can I best collaborate with you? You know, this is the 3. The impression of me was the 2. This is the 3. So this is like, you know, crossing the threshold. But this also feels like, advocate is not the right word. I almost had ambassador. To be somehow an ambassador for the deck. And of course we've got the healing double snakes there. How curious. And then this, as they say, is kind of a combination of the Hanged Man and the Tower. So how can I best collaborate is to be released. And if we take that electricity to be kind of mental energy, which I do sometimes in the Tower card, to be an intellectual bolt from the blue, like a shocking realization, a shocking understanding. So, and what's interesting is it's the blasted oak, so kind of let go of some kind of, be released from some kind of tradition or way of viewing things. See, it was hard for me to come to this because, to me, where I grew up, the house that I grew up in, my parents called that land, that place, Twin Oaks, because we had, well, actually, I think the one that was outside my bedroom window was a triple oak. So from the same ground, you had 3 strong trunks coming out, and then the one closest to the garage was a twin oak. It was a double oak with 2 trunks. And so my sympathy in this card is for the oak tree. It's like, oh no, the oak. I'm not too worried about the guy falling for some reason, or girl, or whoever it is. It's like, my sympathy is with the oak. Until I just kind of worked it out here, and I'm thinking, well, it's, the oak is something old and established, and we need to be released from it. I want to go hug the oak. So, even though I'm not what most people would call traditional, I just have that tree identification thing going on. So that's an awakening of its own, that I'm to think of the oak in this particular card as a negative, at least at this moment. It's like to allow myself, collaborate by allowing myself to become unmoored from the things that that kind of, even if they're kind of trapped, or, you know, kind of have me bound in an unhealthy position or situation, at least make me feel grounded. Or are somehow better than falling. So when I look at this, I'm starting to think of, have you guys ever had, and I don't have them anymore, thank goodness, but I had them when I was younger, because they're, I don't know, sometimes they can be disturbing, but they're disruptive of sleep patterns. So, and what I'm talking about is a falling sensation. When you are falling asleep, you actually go through a falling phase. And that didn't work very well for me. I would always have to break the falling phase. But I used to get this thing, and I remember this when I was a child. So you're in your bed, You're in your bed, laying in bed, and I'd start to fall asleep, and it felt like the bed was floating and it was turning over. I was going to fall out. So I had this weird thing going on like that. And I've read about it somewhere. I can't remember what it said about it. But so as the bed, and it got, at first it seemed weird to me, and then, and I would always just break it just to make it, I would jerk, or I would do something to break that falling thing. But, there was a time when I was old enough that I just said, all right, I'm going to see if I can just endure the falling, and I can go all the way over. I was just wanting to go all the way over and see what would happen. I don't think I was able to do it. So eventually I kind of was more circumspect about it, but it still was disturbing, and obviously wasn't allowing me just to go to sleep. But this is reminding me of that kind of disorienting, as I was looking at it, of that kind of, I have to allow myself to just kind of fall into the Greenwood and what it is. So what are your strengths as a deck? It's transporting, because here you have this person traveling to this island over here, and she has some interesting things to say about this in her book. I can't remember exactly what it is, but then you have the sun also rising over here, so it's that in-between time. I don't know if it's dusk or dawn. So what do they call it? Do they call it liminal? In between time. And then here also is a mound visiting. I think, with this could be, a healing place, a restful and healing place. And certainly time with otters is. And it's kind of so, a healing after this kind of situation, or perhaps a healing even to prepare you, because this is the third card, to prepare you somehow for the trials of life. Isn't that an interesting idea? So kind of is almost ceremonial. This is giving in the Six of Cups. Traditionally it would be flowers. Here is a fish. Offering a fish. So nourishment, spiritual and material and emotional nourishment for the trials of life. Very interesting. Weaknesses or limitations. It's not a love reading deck. That seems to be because it's got the Two of Cups here, so it's not like the Tarot of the Cat, people. It's not for, might be for spiritual relationships, but it's not for love. It's saying kind of here also. I find this a very strange card, but I love the swan, but the whole deer head thing doesn't work very well for me. So this always struck me as kind of a different take on the Ace of Cups. And it still does. And then we have the Ace of Arrows, which is the horse's head. And I have a little trouble with the horse's head also. I know they are wanting us to take this as the mouth. And if you look at this horse, it was in another card. It was in the Sun card behind. If you look at that head, oops, so that wider 2 points is actually like the ears. It's a very poor representation of a horse's head. Maybe it's supposed to be a horse's body with a bird head. That's what it kind of looked like to me. Or something else. In any case, this arrow coming out here, maybe an idea coming out of the horse's head. It just doesn't, this card also doesn't make a lot of sense. So I guess that's a weakness. A weakness is that there's some symbology that just is going to be confusing to me. That I'm just going to have to really wrestle with. It just seems contrary to common sense for me. It's not going to be a common sense kind of a deck. 7. What is the potential outcome of our time together? Uh-oh. We're going to be battling. Well, we do have the Nine of Cups. We've got 2 nines here. So this is the Two of Stones. So you've got 2 stones kind of over water in her description of this, and you have a log or a plank on them, and two hares kind of competing for territory or battling. Lots of very interesting energy depicted by the brush strokes in there. So that to me there's a real sense of clashing here. What is the potential of our time together? And then this Nine of Arrows. Some of the arrows are actually going away from this person, or are they all going away from the person? So this would be kind of similar to the Nine of Swords, but it doesn't have that feel to me at all. If the arrows are actually going away, now, I have to admit that I'm falling back on the Wildwood Tarot. And in the Wildwood Tarot, this is depicted as somebody who's kind of wasting their energy. They're trying and trying and trying something, and they're not being accurate. Things are just flying all over. And although this has that, it's not the feeling that I have with it. To me, this is kind of like the Nine of Wands to me. When I look at this, to me this is somebody who almost doesn't have to use the bow and arrow in their hands. They're more like a porcupine. They can just, their energy, if they want you to back off, or whatever, to me this is almost like a power card, that you have the power to hold any negative energies at bay. You can just shoot them out. So that, again, it's kind of, to me, it's very porcupine-ish. So, I don't know. But then in the end, we have the Nine of Cups. So, nearing completion on both messages here. Interesting. It's almost like being able to use the deck for defense and renewal. And so maybe this two of battling bunnies needed to be in the middle. Can't say that felt super I'm super confident of how I'm seeing those cards. But that's okay, because eventually the outcome of our time together will come to pass. So it's maybe, and I'm not going to record this actually, it's more an exercise in understanding the deck, in using the deck and seeing how I can get meaning from the deck by putting it together in sets of 3. So I don't feel like this is some kind of definitive deck interview for it. What is one thing you ask of me? Something that the deck is asking of me. It's coming to sit with it a while in its own energy. Being fair. Stripping it down. Got 2 majors with this one. So this, to me, I see at least one figure here, if not 2 things kind of representing people. This could also be the Ace of Stones stone also. It looks much like that. But this looks so much like a human figure that I feel like that's, you know, to kind of come into the ancestral center, because surely, I need my little pointer here, my fat fingers aren't working. This is certainly a shamanic ancestral figure here, waiting to be consulted. So this is kind of the deck. This is the deck saying we need to sit. You do. You need to come in and you need to sit with me. And I feel like it's just sitting in silence. And then here's that same figure stepping out. So kind of stepping out of this situation. Oh my gosh, this is what I'm getting. It wants me to become this. It wants me to become this figure. So I'm going from this kind of stepping in this blank figure that looks like a cutout, and then I'm going to come in here. This is what it's asking me to do. It's asking me to come in here, and then after I sat with it, it wants me again. I feel like I'm being asked to be an ambassador, or and there's my identification with the oak, and advocate or ambassador. This is what, well, I call it justice. For the Greenwood or this tarot. So yeah, that was a freaky realization. Oh, it's stepping out. It's asking me to become this. Oh my God. And then, last, yes, the transition. It's asking me to make, to make the transition. It could even be asking, because this is something with horns, it's death, to go even further than this, that we have 3, a transition. Sorry for all the glare. This, from this to this, and then from this to this. Wild process. So it's not a deck that asks very much of me or anything. What kind of readings does this deck most enjoy? Oh, well, here's the Lover's card after we saw that as a weakness for the Two of Cups. Here's the Ace of Stones and Eight of Stones. Grounding, grounding, grounding. She's even appears to be grounding something here. Well, no, she's chiseling. She's not grounding. So, with the Lovers in the middle, what I think of this is not people lovers, it's combining this. It's that healing, caduceus binding of these two stones. The Ace and the Eight. And this Ace of Stones is a stone of ancient symbols with the labyrinth there. And this, you know, to me this is a working, you know, this person is working. Creating symbols. It's funny that such a symbolic deck, although it's giving me two cards full of symbols, seems to be saying that, you know, what kind of reading do you most enjoy? That there are two material cards coming up. It's interesting because it's making me think, especially with this card, is if it would, which is not, the reason I'm having trouble is because I'm trying to figure out how you would do this as a style of reading. But to have a style of reading in which you choose a card, so let's take one. I'll grab the bunnies again. And do this. Essentially do this. So to present some cards and then ask whoever the person is that you're reading for, or if you're doing it for yourself, to actually draw these, to kind of copy them, and then write about your experience. You know, what is that symbol? Or if you were to change this symbol, what does that conflict mean to you? In other words, turning around and creating something by doing a reading that involves the querent creating something themselves, creating their own system of symbols, or their own, I will call this a touchstone, creating their own touchstone of symbols. Or perhaps it's wanting to do readings in which it is providing someone with, you know, the reading itself is just providing someone with symbols. But I don't think this is a card of making something. Very curious. This I probably will write down, because that is such a curious suggestion for what kind of readings do you enjoy the most. Because, I mean, you could say with these, oh, well, you know, ground yourself, you know, readings for grounding yourself. But to me, this is not a deck about grounding. It's like going down through the ground or passing, it's this kind of, this kind of transformation. It's not asking me to ground. It's asking me to become this thing and then to let it go, to transform. It's transforming. So what a curious set to go with that one. And that I am going to save that answer because that just brought up some really interesting suggestions. And I do find that the decks will give you suggestions about how that Tarot of the Cat people, I can't remember what I did. I may have asked it, what's the best way to use your something. And I got that number of 10. I got 10s. And that's why I started messing with the cards in sets of 10. And there's so this, I think it's telling me something about a style of reading that I could use this for. I was very curious. So last question. How will you challenge me? Well, it certainly has challenged me. It continues to challenge me. And it's going to challenge me. It's going to challenge me with this last question. I don't know. Challenge, I mean, the reason I'm pausing, this is not a loaded card. To me, these two, especially this one, is a very loaded card. I mean, look at that. You've got, and to me, I don't know what other people see, but this looks to me like an elephant standing behind, like just huge, something huge and ancient standing behind there. And then there's this cloaked figure here that's full of stars. And you have all 7 chakras, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You could say there's a 7 up there, and all of this light around here. So this celestial being here, and this thread, this conduit to the figure lying here. So this, again, very shamanic card. And or an energy healing card, because you hear people talk about energy healing. It's, for example, Reiki. It's not so much that you are doing something, so much as you are a conduit, just like there's this line to the person from higher energies or sources through there. So yeah, that's how it's going to challenge me. It's so hugely cosmic. It's expecting a lot from me, certainly. And this would be to burn off what isn't necessary. This kind of, I think, is her meaning for this card. Again, I'm so tree identified that I'm just like, why are you chopping these things down? Leave them up. But sometimes you do have to clear the space, and I do get that. And I do that on my own property sometimes. You do have to clear a space because it's not even good for the trees to be too crowded and can be a greater fire danger. So this is a matter of controlling the environment. And then there's this, challenging me to enter the cave there. This funny little rider figure, the guy riding the reindeer. Oh, come on. Webcam, focus. Focus on the little reindeer guy. No? This far? Wants to focus on my hands. Can I get my hands out? No. Alright. So much for focus. We got the giant bear. I am not as, I don't feel, it's funny, I don't feel as connected to white bears or polar bears as I do to other bear forms. So this ends up being kind of a curious card for me. Kind of a rainbow and the sun coming up behind the bear. Although it's the creepy skeletal bear that is the guardian, this feels like a guardian to me. And although it's the Judgment card, it doesn't feel like the Judgment card to me. If I take it as the Judgment card, then this is about answering the call. Clearly I need to read more about her. I don't know if these are probably yew trees. Probably so. So, how will you challenge me? Challenge me with this deep, complicated symbology. Very interesting. I do feel, after going through that, like this deck really asks a lot of the average human being in terms of pathways. Like, I don't know how you would do, and I don't know that it would ask for you to do, a really mundane sort of reading with this deck. Which is fine. It's just, again, it's me mentally exploring what can and can't be done by me with this deck. Maybe, like even this, I can't see that as your average heartbreak. That, you know, the heart is so big in comparison to the little tiny pin kind of arrows. And it's just like, to me, that's like your heart is strong enough to withstand whatever you're going through. This is almost like to me it feels like the sun ceremony, where the Native Americans, they would pierce the skin of the chest and then, kind of pull against it. Kind of an endurance card. So I do love this. So this might be the kind of deck, if I were working with somebody, where I would just kind of, again, I'm very inclined to take off the tarot associations and give somebody 1 or 3 cards and just have a conversation about it, and just say, what is this to you? What do you see here? It's almost more, gosh, I can't remember. Was it Barbara Moore who really advocates that kind of reading in which the reader asks questions more than doing the interpretation themselves? Like, would say, even something, you could either just ask them what they think of this card, and if they come up blank, say, there's acorns here, have you ever seen acorns or apples, your association with apples, berries, start, helping them look at the card and continue to ask questions, what's your relation, does this feel like you're provided for? What does this feel like? Or, does it, is it that everything is perishable? Is that what, and instead of interpreting it myself. So anyway, there it is. Like, few images, very few of the images are as straightforward as this one right here. Some of them have kind of traditional Two of Arrows, kind of traditional symbols that we've seen. Really is kind of a ceremonial. I mean, you can, some of them are just like this. To me feels like not the sun ceremony, and I feel like I'm getting that wrong. I can't think of the name of it. Anyway, but the kind of ceremony where they would, and I can't remember if this was Native Americans who did this or who did this, but where they bury somebody alive and, you know, allow them to breathe, give them a breathing hole. But that kind of initiation, that kind of sort of terrifying encounter with death, kind of an initiation. So, a deck of initiation. But that isn't the kind of reading. It says these are the readings. And of course, the Lover's cards, that ceremony is also an initiation into union. Curious, curious, curious. So the exploration continues. And I've managed to make an hour-long video out of it. But I do feel that this deck hasn't been given enough lengthy attention. I'm sure I'm not the only person who has had, you know, feels that it's a compelling deck, that the images are very compelling, and yet almost so chock full of that kind of, again, primal imagery that it's like strong liquor or something, you know. It's like you only want to have your strong liquor at certain times and you can only take it in small doses. So the small dose, because it's so strong, is to look at it for a second and then you have to just put it aside. So all very interesting. Feel free to leave comments about your own experiences with this deck. Pros, cons, how you dig into it, how you work with single cards. If you've ever done that kind of drawing thing or creating your own kind of touchstone of symbols. That would be kind of like, even though this is kind of all in one, it would almost be like the pagan Book of Shadows, kind of a, not for spells necessarily, but for your own personal symbology. Alrighty, this is it. I'm finished. I'm finished talking. I have my mouse. The pointer is going toward the stop recording button. So take care, everybody. I hope this kind of helped you with your own explorations of this deck. Take care. Bye-bye.